Dr. Mestenhauser, I wonder if you could provide a definition of internationalization to new students in the field or to scholars that may not be as familiar with this area of research.
Yeah, I think we need to distinguish between international education and internationalization of higher education. I define it quite differently from most people who offer definitions, and they're mostly oriented to the process. My definition of international education is that it's a system of knowledge. And, I stress system and the knowledge part. They are the major features of that, and that knowledge is both formal. I know that's from the curriculum. That's the key to international education. Informal, from the media, that people collect biases and information and so on, and also from implicit learning. And that one has been neglected, but I define it as basically subconscious learning, that people learn more than they can explain, and that they think they know until that knowledge is brought to the level of consciousness, and that probably happens most in study abroad or in acquiring some unusual experiences out here. And so that is basically the knowledge that's needed for functioning in the 20th century and so on. And that informal knowledge, of course, includes biases that people have, mindsets, prejudices, and certainly what is the antecedent of international education, and that's ethnocentrism, that most people think in terms of their nations and judge others by the standards of that nation. So ethnocentrism is part of that knowledge base, actually, because it's a firm cognitive map out here. So internationalization then would be the educational change and reform, because there is a big gap between what we know and what we need to know. And so as a result of that, the reform has to take place, and that's not easy, because most people don't like change. They are satisfied with the status quo, so there is a major problem. So the educational change is the aspect of internationalization, and the internationalization, of course, would have to be both for individual students and faculty, but also for institutions. That's where most of the problems are, because most institutions are supporting individualistic approaches, but institutionalizing it is very difficult out here. And I have lived through that with our academic dean, who had absolutely no understanding that the institutionalization had to happen. And so as a result of that, I completed a 5-year of leadership in the college out here, and left it because there was no more functioning possible, no improvement, and so on. So that's the definitions that I would give you.
Yeah. When we talk about international education in particular, one of the things that we've talked about is the nature of complexity, too, that if you're focusing on teaching about internationalism, this becomes an almost impossible task. Could you say a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, my basic approach to that comes from the practice of it. I have been here long enough. I've actually been involved more than 60 years in international education, so I have observed that and studied a great deal and did a lot of readings, and concluded that many of the concepts that are needed in international education do come from academic disciplines. The problem is that the disciplines may not have been internationalized. Even the political science that talks about international relations, it's not internationalized. It's our policy toward others, usually. So that needs to be internationalized. There are people in international studies who are beginning to do that, however. So I identified about 16 disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Byrne, who was one of the gurus and died recently, thought that it was necessary to have 21 disciplines to define a single culture.
Oh my God.
So I am a little bit less complex, but
Yeah.
the 16 disciplines is very complex. The difficulty is, that a comprehensive university has both the social sciences, from which these complex terms come and concepts, but most of international activity is in sciences, information, sciences, agriculture, developmental fields, and so on. So, they need to be translated to. I once gave a seminar which I called Putting Culture into Agriculture. And it was, very successful, as people recognize that their own culture makes a lot of difference out here. So the academic fields, for example, the key ones would be psychology, from which some of the learning theories come in. And they influence also the field of communications. And that's another important field from which the intercultural communication approaches come from. That's the field that has made most progress in the field, has best literature, best research, and so on, and is very needed. The problem is that it's based on interpersonal theories of communication. So it's directed toward individual people, individual students, business people who go abroad, and so on. That's hugely important, but it's not, for example, much relevant to the development of the institutional approach, leadership, because institutions have their own dynamics and so on, and this approach might not take care of that too. And obviously geography and history are a very important field. Political science, when you have the international relations one. Sociology, they have a number of concepts. One is the sociology of knowledge, that has a contribution to this too. Another one is the literature on globalization, which originally came from sociology and so on, so that's very important. Obviously languages, languages I think are absolutely essential. A Polish emigre by the name of Eva Hoffman published a book which was called Lost in Translation. So even after a PhD from Harvard, she still could not understand jokes or cartoons and so on, because they are so culture-bound, so ingrained in knowledge and so on, and I could not sympathize with that kind of an approach more too. So language is very important, not just because of the jokes, but because it's supposed to convey ideas and so on. And business people who ignore knowledges and depend only on translators better have very skilled interpreters to be able to really reach good agreements.
I had one question. I mean, when we talk about knowledge and international education, Jane Knight is viewed as sort of having the definition of international education, and you differ quite a bit from her. We've got just a couple minutes left. Could you say more about how your approach is different from hers?
Well, she defines that as a process only. Knight certainly include knowledge, and when you add the education, that's also a process too. Secondly, she's the definition her is kind of omnibus, covers the whole universe, which really makes it an impossibility to apply. So she has a little escape clause that institutions will have to define what they can do, and that means basically that there is no standard, anybody can do anything they can, and it's international education, and that whole definition is kind of circular too, which is international education is international perspectives, no definition of the perspectives and so on. So those are the key differences that I have with that definition.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Mestenhauser.
Thank you too.